Welcome back everybody, another week on the F100 project, and today we're going to solve the power steering line issue whenever you do the Crown Vic swap. Using one of these subframes is super popular on these old trucks because it gives you the benefit of rack and pinion steering. The challenge is making it work. In our instance, we're running an LS style water pump or GM Type 2. You could use this video to help you as well with like the Saginaw pump or a Ford pump. And then some people are using like the Volvo electric or the Coyote style electric pumps, especially if you run a Coyote motor, which didn't come with the mechanical power steering pump. So my idea is to make everything in -6 lines and just use PTFE like we did for all the fuel lines on the truck. That way it's kind of easy to service, parts are readily available. You just need to convert the outputs from here and here to a -6. So let me show you what we ordered. Oh, by the way, bought that yesterday. These are the turn1steering.com. These two fittings, this converts the output from our power steering pump to the -6. It also has, we're gonna have a 2 gallon per minute restrictor built into that because those Crown Vic racks don't run on as high a pressure as most of the factory power steering pumps do. Also, this is an adapter that'll convert the reservoir output to a -6, which kind of just squeezes an O-ring in there. Pretty cool. These are 40 bucks each, by the way. So when you see these custom cars or trucks that have been overpriced, according to most people, you start adding everything up. Like just our power steering line setup is going to cost over $200. You start doing that all over the vehicle. The next thing you know, you got 40 grand in cost and parts. And you haven't even paid anybody labor. These fittings are from eBay, and I went ahead and wrote it down because I know some people will ask. TYLLQ was the user for those, whatever that means. $58.90 was the shipped price for these, and they basically just go in place of those factory lines and convert them to -6 on the rack. It has the O-rings, and I don't know what all these nuts and stuff are for, but maybe we'll figure it out together. This kit came from Car Parts Share House on eBay. $67.52 is the delivered cost. It has this PTFE hose. It's stainless braided within the black nylon over the top. And it came with what I thought was pretty cool, like 10 AN fittings for the PTFE. So you've got like some 30 degrees, you got some 180 degrees, you got 90 degrees, and then 4 straights. So surely amongst all of these, you can build what you need to go from your power steering pump to your rack. And you know, those fittings are 15 to 20 bucks a piece. So it's kind of a bargain if you add it up. But again, we've got over $200 worth of stuff here to get this done. Speaking of getting it done, I'm gonna put on some more clothes because it's freaking cold out there. That's snow. I'm gonna do my best with maybe zooming in edit and this lighting. Make sure you guys can see what I'm working on. So the first thing I'm gonna do is get these 2 fittings out and the O-rings that need to attach to them. I'll put my little cart here because inevitably I'm gonna drop some things. I see this come up so often online, social media, like Facebook groups, people asking like which one's the pressure, which one's the return line. But if you look at the factory lines that came off of these racks, you can tell that one of them, like this lower one, has a pivot on it. It clearly couldn't be a high pressure line, so this will be the return back to the reservoir. There's a little bit of oil in this cap, so I'm just going to use it. And these O-rings. This one on the top will be your pressure. And they're clearly a different size, the fittings that go into the rack themselves. I do want to point out, this is the second set of these fittings that I actually ordered on eBay because the first set that claimed to be like 6 AN certainly were not. I'm not sure that's not even going to sit down in the recess. The good news is that is by no means a critical dimension. It just needs to fit in that slot or in that recess so the bracket can slide over it and hold it down. So there's our hold down. Now we can put the fittings on our pump, both on the output and the return, and then we can start deciding what sort of angles we're going to want to use and how much hose to cut. Take this factory output, aka pressure line from our LS pump, and see that's the factory base, and then there's still another portion in there. Take a look. Maybe I should have talked to the guys at CVF first and asked them exactly what their restriction is, or what their gallons per hour output is set to. So I'm comparing these two. I don't know, I'll try to see if you guys can see and compare it to what was sent from CVF. It does look like the one from turn 1 is a smaller diameter than the CVF one. You have to perform kind of two motions here. This is like a spring-loaded little cap. So you have to create pressure far enough down so you can get the threads. I think this reservoir fitting is pretty cool from turn 1 and kind of ingenious to convert it to a -6. You got that O-ring and this cap, and then your fitting. Because this is just technically a barbed fitting from the factory that you just put a hose over and put a hose clamp on. So you kind of have to understand that what you're doing is compressing this O-ring against the back of that barb with that nut. Ooh. So the nut rests on it to about there. And when we tighten these two guys together, that's what's going to create our seal. Keeping in mind, this is not a pressure side. Basically, it's just the fluid after it's gone through the valving in the rack. It's going to come back into the reservoir. I want to point out again that I brought this up when we did our fuel lines. You really should have AN wrenches, which essentially are just aluminum wrenches, to not mess up the finish or the edges or whatever on this aluminum. But I'm not going to spend that kind of money. Now we can make some decisions on what angles we need coming off the pump and from the rack. And actually, I think this 180 is going to be perfect to sit on the output side of our pump. I'm going to go ahead and thread this down by hand. Make sure we get a good representation of what it's capable of. And for this output, I'm thinking a 90 would work, because I really don't want it to extend beyond the front of the serpentine system, if at all possible. Our radiator is going to have a few inches of clearance in our fan, so it's not about that, it's just more about aesthetics of not having these hoses sticking out in front of the engine. So from there, we need to kind of focus on what is the hose going to do. And it's probably a good idea to get our hose out and kind of see how much flexibility it has before we go committing it to making a bend that it doesn't like. So if we come straight out of this hose to that fitting, probably another 90 would be great. But you want to keep in mind the engine is going to move a little bit separate from the chassis, so you don't want it super tight or you will create a leak just for sheer tension. But we can always put like an arc in it. A 90 is definitely not the way to go, but maybe a 45. Then we have to keep in mind we've got another one coming down from our pressure side and how it's going to look when it reaches in to the pressure side input on the steering rack. With this setup though, I'm left with two 45s. So if that tends to be or ends up being the right move, we can still do that. So what we should do is build this pressure line first, and then we'll do the return. These things are such a nightmare to do. If you guys watched my fuel line video, you know it's not just super basic. And you got to do things in order, kind of like crimping brake lines. You want to make sure that you have your ends put on before you fray the lines up too terribly bad. You always want to put some kind of tape over that braided line so when you cut it, it doesn't fray out terribly. So you can kind of see how these eventually all go together. This little insert right here, it's called the olive. It needs to go on the outside of the PTFE lining, on the inside of the braided stainless steel. In my experience, which is little, I found that getting it started with your thumb and then a little tappy tap with a body hammer will get it to where the nylon or the PTFE is flush inside there. So we'll take this tape off. We pull that nut over there. You're supposed to put a little bit of oil or like silicone or something on that. Kind of helps the medicine go down, as they say. If you can start these by hand, it's pretty good to make sure you're not cross-threading them. And again, this is not the way you should do it. They make aluminum insert jaws for these so you don't damage your stuff. But I'm not spending hundreds of dollars on tools to do this, as little as I do. Do the other side. Well, I'll tell you what, that is a good looking line if I do say so myself. And by the way, I did blow through it again with compressed air because, as you guys probably saw whenever I first cut that end, a lot of junk goes up inside that tube. Alright, the length looks good. It's a nice clean line. It's just snugged in. Yeah, I think that's going to be our guy. Another mighty fine looking line. Let's see, what do we do? 90 up top. One thing I guess I didn't think of, but I'm glad that we were being smart. You don't want a bunch of tension laterally against this one because this is just a plastic fitting, and I feel like if you had a lot of resistance one way or another and it got a lot of heat cycles, this stuff gets really hot and cool, that plastic would eventually break. I think we are good to go. I can tighten these guys up and call it a day. See if I can't get you guys a good angle so you can kind of see the clearances here. There's between the fitting and that line. And then here's the supply line as it comes out and has clearance around the belt. And then I'm sure you guys can see plenty good on those fittings on the rack. And see that there's room between them. We don't have any contact points, and again, they don't stick out past the serpentine kit, and the angle you'll see them is from about here when the front end is on. I guess we can't really chalk this up as a win until we put some fluid in it, so I'll go ahead and do that. I mean, if it leaks without pressure, we know we've got problems. So fresh and so clean in there. Now, you would never want to fill one that high. You should pay attention to the marks here. That's full while it's hot, but there's got to be a lot of voids in this rack and the lines. So by filling it at the top, hopefully it'll even be above this line, but this return can kind of help start filling up the steering rack. And then there's this whole process of jacking the front end up and turning the steering wheel lock to lock without it running. A lot of manufacturers even recommend that you put like a vacuum on this cap. Conveniently have an old cap laying around that you don't use anymore, so you can drill a hole and put like a fitting in it to hook a vacuum line to and pull everything out air-wise from the system. It's just not realistic for most people. So I'm going to put that cap on for now and let that thing sit for a while. I will jack it up and turn it left to right, but the purpose of this video was how to build custom power steering lines, and in my opinion, it's to switch them over to a universal type fitting like the 6ANs. And let me know if you're still watching the video. If you want to see coverage of this new F-150, that's the 2022 Power Boost and XLT trim package. Pretty cool hybrid technology, etc. I really appreciate you guys' views, your comments I respond to. Click like and subscribe over here and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.